The Laundry is proudly produced by Strise.
It's a playbook of what shouldn't be done. We had a minister who sold a painting from a totally unknown painter's €500,000 to a guy in Asia that nobody knows. And we also have 2 Saudi billionaires who decided to let the networks use our bank account to shadow some of the money.
Welcome to The Laundry, the podcast connecting AML, compliance, and financial crime to the real world. We're bringing you something a little different with this podcast. We're touching the laundry down in one country to understand how it looks at financial crime and the lessons we can take from that. To start us off, we're going to the EU's second largest economy and the inventor of more than 1,000 types of cheese. I'm your host, Marit, CEO of Strise, and in this episode, we are discussing everything you need to know about financial crime in France. And by everything, we mean tous les aspects.
You speak very good French.
Gracias.
We'll be discussing some of the big moments which have shaped France's approach to financial crime, the present-day regulation and risks, and what the future looks like for France in the fight against money laundering, terror financing, and corruption. And to dive into this topic, I'm here with Gabriel Vedrenne, senior reporter, ACAMS, moneylaundering.com, and welcome to The Laundry, Gabriel. How does money laundering in France operate? Is it a big problem? Is it very severe? Or have you really been able to cripple it to some extent? How is the situation today?
Well, as a major economy, obviously France is exposed to money laundering and financial crime, so there is no debate about that. But if you look maybe closer, you have a very specific type of exposure because France is not really exposed to the first stage of money laundering. So when we are talking about placement, for example, the criminal organization tend to avoid France because it's really hard to put cash into the banking system because the financial sector is pretty aware and there are some defense in place, so it's pretty hard. Then, if you're thinking about the layering aspect, it's becoming more interesting because it's a big economy. We have a lot of trade, for example, so obviously it's appealing. But I would say that the biggest exposure when it comes to France is more at the stage of the integration. Because France is basically a country with very appealing real estate, for example. We are the main producer of luxury goods worldwide, for example. And also we have the challenge of supervising non-financial sectors. It's the same everywhere. But obviously in France, stakes are higher due to this kind of luxury positioning. So we are talking about flats that worth millions. We are talking about yachts. We are talking about Chanel and Balmain and all that kind of products that are really, really expensive. So I think that's maybe some main exposure is there. And then also in terms of exposure and money laundering, you also have to think about the geographical aspects because France is basically at the crossing between South and North Europe. So we are highly exposed to all, for example, the drug trafficking routes. The cannabis that's coming from Morocco, for example, will go through Spain and then France to reach market in Germany, for example, or in the Nordic countries. And equally, or conversely, you will have also, for example, chemical and synthetic drugs produced in the Netherlands or in Poland and Czech Republic that will go toward France to reach, for example, the Spanish market. So we are very, very highly exposed to that.
When we were booking this episode, Gabriel, you mentioned that you need to go back to 2012 to understand the current situation, particularly regarding the public authorities' response and the enforcement landscape. So why is 2012 such a crucial year to understand financial crime policy in France?
Well, because if you are looking at France nowadays, you would maybe think about the FATF ratings. And, France bags pretty high scores, if not some of the best. So it looks like France is pretty well positioned right now. But the picture was quite different 15 years ago. And it's just a result of a conjunction of different events. So maybe I'm going to start on the political side, because we had, for example, the Chirac presidency, which was marred with many suspicion of financial crime and embezzlement. We also have the Gaddafi-Sarkozy case with the first revelation occurring in 2012. And on that very same year, we also had what we call the Cahuzac case. So Cahuzac was a budget minister. He was basically charged and tasked with bringing money into the state coffer, but it appeared that the guy was basically committing tax fraud to a large scale. So such scandal triggers some attention, and it's allowed to have a momentum in France that led, for example, to the setting up of a national financial crime national prosecutor office, which was set up in December 2013. So that was the first turning point. And we also had on the more business and compliance side, we also had a few events during that year. So, for example, we had the oil engineering firm Technip, which was fined almost $400 million in the US in 2010. We also had Total, so the oil company, being fined a similar amount for corruption once again in the US. We also had Alstom being fined almost $800 million in the US. And then we have the bank. So BNP was sanctioned almost 9 billion for sanction violation. And we also had Société Générale, who faced also a huge fine for similar problems. So all that changes, all that event led to changes. And we also had an anti-corruption agency that was set up in December 2016. So it's just show that there was something happened over the last 15 years, and France is totally different now than what it used to be.
Yeah, I can imagine. So you both had the kind of, let's say, the political track with a lot of politicians being involved in financial crime. You had a lot of, let's say, non-financial institutions also receiving huge fines for fraudulent conduct. And then also you had the banks getting fines as well. So there was a lot of big events, I guess, happening approximately at the same time that set the scene. But how explosive were all these things in the French society?
Well, it was basically on the top of the agenda, because when you have a minister who's in place and who's just committing tax fraud, it's a huge problem. So it was basically the main topic over the full year 2012. And the Sarkozy case also with a potential illicit financing from Libya was also something that was revealed the very same year. So it was really the top topic within the political sphere, and it was also, there was a huge push from the NGOs and also advocacy groups. So it was clearly on the top of the agenda. And we also had a president at that time, which was François Hollande, who really make a kind of a switch from what it used to be. So corruption became a big topic, and also the answer of the public authority was something that was required, and they enacted. So it was a change compared to what it used to be before.
Would you say that like all these events is what then leads France to have such a high rating today, that the society and corporations and everyone is kind of aware of the issues and take it even more seriously than perhaps other countries, perhaps the other countries that you cover?
Yeah, I do think it has a huge impact. It induces changes. And maybe I think that maybe you can also make a parallel with other countries. For example, Germany. Germany faced a similar problem, but to a smaller scale and also a bit later. And you see that the awareness is happening right now, like over the past couple of years, but it's really recent. Whereas in France, it happened a decade before. So we are basically now harvesting the fruit of such efforts, but it was different before. And for example, you see that in Germany.
I just wanted, it's a little side story, but I remember when I went to high school in France between 2005 and 2008. And I mean, this was before international money transfer was very easy. So I had like a Norwegian bank card, and my parents, they would transfer money to me and to my Norwegian bank account every month so I could pay for things. And then I would withdraw euros in cash. And then I would just go to the machine next to the ATM and just put all the cash into the cash machine, and then it would come into my French account. I mean, now thinking back on it, it's quite crazy that was just so easy. There was never any controls. Like anyone could just go to this 24/7 open cash machine and just input cash and would go to your bank account. So I am glad things have changed since that time.
But what you need to know is that, for example, there is a mandatory reporting for any cash deposit. And so even if there is no requirement, everything is tracked, and for years, because France adopted a similar framework as in Italy, for example, and we are really paying attention to cash payment. So it's also a kind of cultural difference with, for example, let's say Germany. You cannot bring cash like this, because even if no one will ask you a question, it will be tracked and recorded. And if you have several small red flags being associated, then you might face some problem. So in your case, it wasn't suspicious, but it could have become suspicious.
Then they probably had a lot of records of me depositing cash for like 3 years in France between that. But you asked about some specific examples. Yeah, I think that will be really interesting to hear some specific cases on how you are exposed to this money laundering risk. I would love to hear that.
Well, one of the main schemes or typology that police investigators are uncovering nowadays mainly are related to the Chinese community, because we have basically Chinese merchants who are really at the crossing of different sectors, and they are able to collect cash and to also launder it. And they are also offering much cheaper fees to launder money. So we have a lot of cases, and we still have some case to be brought to court, but we have a lot of cases involving, for example, the Chinese textile trading hub next to Paris, because basically such people, because they are handling a lot of cash, they would collect cash from drug traffickers. They would keep the cash, make a compensation with a fake invoice to make a company transfers. And then the cash would be handed back to Chinese tourists visiting France, and they would use that money to purchase luxury goods and to bring it back to China without paying taxes. So it's a kind of association where you have a kind of cash compensation. You also have what we call the Daigou system, which is a kind of compensation and surrogate shopping scheme, which is really successful in China. And these people are also able, for example, to offer compensation with products. So, for example, a drug dealer would give some cash in Paris and would receive basically textile in a shop in Morocco. So there is no money circulating at the end. And it's really successful because it's really hard to track. So that's one of the main typology that we are identifying right now. And we also have all the money trail leading to the Emirates. So basically Dubai and Asia. So that's one of the main case. Then all the other main money laundering schemes would be, would involve, for example, real estate investment. So because we have the Riviera, the French Riviera, but you also have some highly demanded real estate, for example, in the Alps, in Courchevel, for example, just next to Switzerland. We also have Paris, obviously. You also have Normandy. So you have a lot of very sexy places where people want to put some money. And obviously, it's a problem. And maybe also to mention a very and more recent process or trend, the financial supervisor of the financial market recently spotted that the people involved in insider trading are nowadays handling much more money to be invested. It looks like the money is coming from organized crime. So there is a suspicion, and not only a suspicion, now there also are some clues that insider trading networks are now working with organized crime because they have some tips for good investment, and they are also offering a kind of a laundering channel. And they are just partnering with groups who have a lot of cash or a lot of money in bank, and they just need to layer it a bit further, and maybe if they can make some profits, it's even better.
You talk about money laundering and terrorist financing in, often in one bucket. So is that a big threat in France, terrorist financing? How are you dealing with that? And what's the current landscape there?
Well, the French authorities are really on alert regarding this, and for obvious reason. And I also think that it played a key role to explain how France is nowadays. Because we had the November 2015 terror attack, called the Paris attack or Bataclan attack. During this investigation, TRACFIN played a really key role because they were able, for example, to identify suspects that were totally unknown from the intelligence services. And it was only based on the financial trail and all the invoice and all the transfer, the payment that has been made by suspects. By doing some mapping, networking exercises, they managed to really identify people that were totally unknown. So it's really put a light on how the FIU can be useful. And since then, they really try to beef up the FIU. So, for example, it was also the case with the No Money for Terror conference. It was in 2018. So it was just an indication that French authorities really view how valuable the FIU can be, and they really put a lot of money and effort. So as a result, we had, I think, a pretty good FIUs that was also able to spot like new typology. Like, for example, 4 years ago, they were able to detect a new way of sending funds. So basically, the people would purchase what we called crypto coupons. So you're going into a corner store or a convenience store, and you would just pay for a plastic card with some codes on it. And then you can send it to a friend, and this friend then can activate the code and get cryptocurrency directly on his wallet. And it was a way, for example, to be able to purchase crypto without having any names being mentioned at any moment. And when the crypto were really transferred to the digital wallet, it was happening, for example, in Turkey or in Syria. So it was out of the scope of French authority. So they were able, for example, to spot that. They also uncover the use of virtual IBAN, for example, which are really a facilitator of fraud schemes, for example. And maybe to conclude on the terrorism financing aspect. So we had the Olympic Games last summer, and the French FIU, for example, play a key role in identifying three planned attacks. So they were, for example, able to identify someone who made some dubious purchases and who was planning to place a bomb just next to a stadium in Saint-Etienne. They were also able to spot someone who was trying to conduct a terror attack during the Torch March. I don't know if that's a proper wording, but you see what I mean.
Yeah. And I mean, for anyone who's listening and work in this field as a professional, this is such a good story on why this work matters, like why working in financial crime prevention actually matters and how it can help prevent such really, really serious events. Okay, we'll be right back to talk about the challenges ahead and France's future. Don't go anywhere.
I want to introduce you to a game changer in the compliance and portfolio risk management, the Strise Portfolio Health Dashboard. This new feature gives you a comprehensive overview of your portfolio risk right from your Strise homepage. What we've built is tackling three of the most critical challenges we all face when it comes to portfolio health. 1, the lack of visibility into portfolio level risk. 2, relying on time-consuming and fragmented data sources. 3, missed compliance obligations due to unclear and inaccessible data. From feedback with compliance officers using our product, we know that having access to a central view is vital in being able to quickly identify PEPs, sanctions, and risk levels across all entities, so you can quickly identify high-risk accounts that need immediate attention. And for those of you working as risk analysts, it's likely that you'll want to be alerted about any up-and-coming reviews for high-risk accounts to ensure a timely and effective risk management. That's exactly why we've created the Portfolio Health Dashboard. Stay tuned for what's next.
So, we've been looking at the past, but let's move to chat about the future. So, AMLA, they chose Frankfurt in Germany as the location for their headquarters. Does that sting a little bit for Paris?
A bit, obviously. Yes. Well, because Paris was also trying to be the chosen one. So there was some disappointment. And also maybe if you think about the track record of the country, will be the host, to be honest. That's a kind of banter. No, but honestly, France is a bit disappointing, but also they are not that worried for a few reasons. First of all, because France is a key pillar within the European Union, so they know that they will have some influence. And also, they are currently lobbying hard, and they are trying to get the position of executive director of AMLA. So the game is not over. They are still playing, and they hope to get it because they didn't manage to have any high ranks. They didn't manage to host AMLA. So now they're trying to have someone who will have a key role within the institution.
Okay, that's good. What do you see as the biggest challenges in fighting financial crime in France in the years ahead?
Well, so on the supervisory side, I would say that public authority are pretty ready and up to date. For example, ACPR, so that's a banking supervisor, they developed intelligence artificial tools like 3 years ago already, and they are really able to process a huge volume of data. So if they are coming on site and they want to take your data, they can really identify what could be wrong quickly and much easily than it used to be. So it's pretty, I'm not really scared regarding this sector. On the non-financial sector, it's really much more the priority nowadays. So we have basically the customs, they decided to beef up all the AML department. And also they are trying to be much more active and communicative. So they used to be on a silent mode. And over the last years, now you can see them being really vocal, sharing examples, sharing what they are doing. So there is something that's happening right now within the non-financial sector, but it's definitely the priority. And now if you go beyond the supervisory aspect, the key challenge is basically the budget, the funding, because there is a lack of money within the police and within the judicial authority.
That's also, the case in Norway that, banks and financial institutions can send SARS and SARS and SARS, but if there's no kind of capacity on the other end that things are picked up on and cases investigated, and it doesn't really help necessarily.
Yeah, no, exactly. And also because the police investigators are really frustrated because they have some skills. And for example, they were able to crack into the encrypted telecom network, EncroChat and Sky ACC. So they were at the origin of such case with the Dutch and the Belgian police. So they have skills, they have motivation, but the budget is clearly a ceiling, a limitation to their work. And it's really a problem. And especially given that France also has some budget issues. So money is not really here, and we would need more money for police investigation into financial crime. So that's also, I think, the main challenge nowadays.
And on let's say the professionals working in regulated entities and in the financial sector, what should compliance, financial crime fighters pay attention to when it comes to this in the years ahead?
There is currently one reform. So there is a law proposal that is currently discussed at the French Assembly. So the text is basically focusing on the fight against drug trafficking, because there is a kind of awareness that now it's becoming much more powerful, dangerous. So they are trying to react. And there is an AML side in this law proposal. So it should be voted on next week, hopefully, maybe Monday. And on the AML side, for example, it's trying to, for example, make some AML certification or training mandatory for any people involved in compliance, for example. It's also trying to make a payment, cash payment when you're renting a car or a boat totally illegal. And they are also trying to make car dealers and rental car companies oblige entity, because they also saw that there is a kind of nexus sometimes between drug traffickers and car rental.
So those type of businesses will now also be subject to AML legislation in France?
If the law passed, yes. And they're also trying to close a gap on the real estate developers because they used not to be oblige entity, because the lawmaker was considering that you have oblige entity before and after him in the process. So there was not a big need for making them oblige entity, but now it's also on the menu. So definitely I would look at the law against drug trafficking that is currently discussed and should be adopted within the next month or weeks.
Well, as always, this does not mean less work for compliance professionals. I feel the legislative burden is kind of increasing. I mean, it is for a good reason, because we do want to fight these crimes. But of course, these things trickle down into the day-to-day work of a lot of people working in various businesses all around. But we have done some episodes on dirty money and foreign money influence in the politics and political elections. And I was just wondering if there are any concerns in France about influence of foreign money in politics.
There is. And actually, we have the trial of former President Sarkozy, because, he could face 7 years of prison and a fine of 300,000 euros, for example. We also have 2 former ministers being prosecuted. So basically for taking money in cash from Libya. So it was, in a way, a kind of foreign money into politics.
Former French President Nicolas Sarkozy's time before the courts is not over. After a complex 10-year investigation, he's set to go on trial on Monday in perhaps his most serious case yet. He's accused of accepting 50 million euros in illegal campaign funds from then Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi for his successful 2007 presidential run. The claims first came to light in 2011 when a son of Gaddafi demanded that Sarkozy pay back the alleged funding. It's alleged he accepted the cash in exchange for agreeing to help whitewash Gaddafi's international reputation.
It's a playbook of what shouldn't be done, because, for example, we have the involvement of dubious people who are really well known for being what we could call them facilitators, but actually they are just corruption deal makers. We had also some safe deposit box being rented with no reason. We had a minister who sold a painting from a totally unknown painter's €500,000 to a guy in Asia that nobody knows. And we also had, for example, a Swiss banker who played a key role, who have invoices that make no sense, for example, paid in cash. And we also have, for example, 2 Saudi billionaires who decided to let the network use our bank account to shadow some of the money. So it's just one example of foreign interference. And we also have, for example, another case. So it's not on trial, but the far-right party, so the Rassemblement National, which is led by Marine Le Pen, which is one of the front runners for the upcoming presidential election, she received, for example, some money. So they borrow money from Russian banks because they were not able to get money in France.
At the center of this inquiry, or one of the things they focused on, was a €9.4 million loan that Marine Le Pen took out from a Czech-Russian bank in 2014. She has always claimed, and her party has always claimed, that we only turned to a Russian Czech bank because no French bank would lend us that money. We went to other banks, they say. No one would lend us the money. So we turned to the Russian Czech bank. She maintains that the fact we took this money from the Czech bank, you cannot necessarily intuit from that we suddenly have to march in lockstep with Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin's line. So she's trying to reject that insinuation that she is somehow Vladimir Putin's puppet. Her party is doing Vladimir Putin's bidding.
So why not? But when it's Russia, it's not any kind of country that's giving you some money. So it raised some question, especially when you know that there are some alignment between the idea of the party and Russia agenda. So it's, you have some foreign money into French politics, and that's one of the key problems because it also relates to corruption. And France had a big problem with corruption. It's improving, as I said, but we used to have a big problem, and for many, many reasons. First of all, maybe impunity among the political world, and also maybe it was a legacy of the French colonies because we had a lot of shady deals during the second half of the 20th century between leaders in African countries, for example, in the French politics. So, for example, Gabon had a huge influence on some of the political parties to be sure and to secure some good arrangement for their country, for example. So, yeah, it's a long story and it's definitely not over.
Oh, this is also, again, just shows why the work in financial crime prevention just matters in the real world. The work that's happening in the space can be tied directly into politics, it can cultural aspects, and big events that can impact society. So yeah, thank you so much for a very interesting conversation. But before we end this episode, I'm going to dish out some quick fire questions for you. Are you ready?
I am.
Who is the most influential figure in French financial crime policy in the last 2 decades?
In the last decade, I would say Renaud van Ruynbeck. So he was a prosecutor. He passed away, unfortunately, last year, but he was a prosecutor who was really dealing with financial crime investigation. And he handled some of the biggest cases, so like the ELF, the oil company ELF case. So he was really influential within the prosecutor community, but also regarding the whole AML community in France.
What sector is the biggest enabler of money laundering in France today?
As I already highlighted, unfortunately, I think that's the real estate and also the luxury goods dealers. And maybe you can also extend it to art galleries and antiquities dealers.
What story should our listeners keep an eye on?
I would suggest to keep an eye on the Chinese money laundering schemes that I mentioned earlier, because it's really interesting and it's combining different typologies and mechanisms. So it's really interesting. And maybe if there is another case to follow, I would suggest to look at the trial currently happening in Marseille, because it's a trial on the financial aspect of the Corsican mafia. And there is a lot of money, and it's also involving casino in Africa. It's involving real estate in the Alps, and also business. So it's really interesting because you have many different aspects combining within one single case. So I would suggest looking at these 2 cases.
That sounds really interesting. Should do an episode on just that case. Does the average person on the streets of France care about these issues?
That's a tricky question. I have mixed feelings, to be honest. Well, culturally speaking, I think that the French are more closer to those of Southern Europe. So compliance is not really embedded from the very beginning. There is a law and there is how the law is enforced or applied. So you have some flexibility, let's say that. But we also had some scandals that raise awareness and put pressure on the political class. So I think that this and the leaks change a bit the game. And also because of the French people having a very, very, very weird relation to money. So if someone is rich, French people tend to think that he either exploited people or committed fraud. So the public is expecting a lot of scrutiny on rich people. So it doesn't help, for example. So that's why I would say yes and no. But in the end, French people should care about it, because if you are a real purely business guy, you know that money laundering and financial crime is making the competition unfair. And if you are totally against this kind of liberal, money-oriented politics, more financial crime means less money, less tax, and in the end, a social state that has less money to change the society. So you should care.
I agree. That brings this spin of the laundry to an end. Gabriel, thank you so much for joining me. Where can people find you and read your work?
So obviously on moneylaundering.com, which is my publication, and otherwise within the ACAMS webinars, LinkedIn, obviously. And also if you are in Paris in May, we will have our European conference. It's going to be huge and I will be there.
Thanks to everyone who is listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, check out the back catalog of more than 100 episodes and follow The Laundry on your podcast platform of choice. We'd love for you to share the podcast on your social media, tell your colleagues about it, give us a 5-star rating. It really helps people to find us. What country should we cover next? Comment on the Strise LinkedIn page, my LinkedIn page, or email laundry@strise.ai. Your host for this episode was me, Marit, our producer was Matthew, our editor was Dominic, and our engineer was Nicholas. The Laundry is proudly produced by Strise. Visit strise.ai for more information. See you next time. The Laundry is proudly produced by Strise.